Carried. Second item is adoption of the minutes of the May 21st meeting. Do I have a motion on the minutes?
Sure.
Kirsty, second. Louise, all in favor? Carried. All right. Public have not joined us tonight, except in David's yard. And so we have a council referral about the temporary use permit amendment to the OCP. And Daniel, you're seeking some specific guidance here to determine what short really means.
Yes, exactly. So this came to you.
Most people have said to me, you know, Drew, you're short. So I can define that quite easily. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, what's in the bylaw itself is just a really simple change to the policy about temporary use permits. It just says all areas within Bowen Island municipality boundaries are designated temporary use permit areas. So it's really like that part of it is really straightforward and sort of matches what came to you in May to say, we're just going to say all of it is, and it's sort of a housekeeping amendment. But then yes, council made this second motion, wanting the advisory planning commission to review the definition of short term or the language around short term in that policy. So it says, the policy starts by saying the municipality may consider issuing temporary land use permits provided the use is short term or seasonal in nature. And so they're looking for a way to have clarity around that term. So when this had come up in an application that we were dealing with, as staff, we were saying, well, short term is really just meaning the 3-year term that's defined in the Local Government Act. And that's why it says permit shall be issued in accordance with the Local Government Act. And if it meant to be shorter, it would have set a shorter time frame than that. But some of the people who were opposed to the permit felt that no, that by saying short term, it meant that it's shorter than the 3-year term that's permitted in the Local Government Act. And I would say council is probably split on the issue.
Why would we want to be different than the Local Government Act? Like, why are we so precious that we would want to be different?
So when I looked at different OCPs, some of them get quite prescriptive and say like, okay, for this type of use, you can have a temporary use permit, but only for 6 months or only for a year for this type of, whatever type of temporary use it is. Yeah, like my general view tends to be, would be to leave it open and then council can determine when an application comes in that this is appropriate or not appropriate.
Right.
Is there of 3 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't see why we would do anything different.
So this is related to the IDLC application, correct? Daniel?
Yeah, that was the trigger where it was for a 3-year term and people said, I don't feel like that's short term. If you let it happen for 3 years, that's basically, you know, giving it full permission to take place.
And indeed, if it's 3 years and then there's one, it can be renewed one time.
Yeah.
On the application form, is there space for an applicant to define the time period and not to exceed the LGA?
I think there is like I remember, so we had one application that was for the car show on Adams Road. And when they first came, we had drafted the permit for a 3-year term and council changed it to a 1-year term and said, you can do it you can do it this summer as a trial, but we're not going to approve it for 3 summers worth. So they did it for 1 year under that. They got it renewed once and then they came back for a 3-year and got a 3-year temporary use permit. So council sort of adjusted it and said, okay, we don't think a 3-year term is appropriate right off the bat. So I'm not sure if the application form specifically says like how long is the temporary use going to last.
Well, you know, I think that's probably a good way to handle it is use the 3-year term as the sort of base, but council has the right to limit it, to give it a try. I mean, that worked really well there. And I'm thinking about some uses of some properties, which may be a temporary use for different uses seasonally. it's probably not appropriate here, but like Christmas tree sales, that would only happen, in December.
Right.
And then in summer, you could do something else. And in the fall, before going back to school, you can have a camp or something. So, a piece of property could possibly have multiple temporary use permits that may limit it in terms of time frame, annually, or just 1 to 3 years. One of the big problems with a lot of communities is that somebody gets a temporary use permit and then they build something which is, pretty substantial there to accommodate their temporary use. And then it's kind of hard to get it away from them again, because they say, oh, we've got this facility and all these improvements we've done for this. And so they want to keep it going. But that's
their problem.
it is their problem. Yes, indeed.
And if they've, applied for the 3-year, they've been given a 3-year, that, they know it might be renewed, but they're SOL.
I mean, there are provisions in the Local Government Act where you can place like essentially undertakings on the permit to say you will remove it and place it back to its original condition at the end of the term. I mean, in general, like I would have a hard time recommending a temporary use permit where they're going to build something specifically for the temporary use. Like the ones I'm comfortable with are like, there's an existing building and we're going to reuse it in a different manner, or we're using the outdoor space.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree, like if somebody builds something for a temporary use, even if it's 3 years, there's going to be an expectation that they get it renewed and they continue.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions. Is council opposed to, or are they concerned about being the ones who are determining what the term should be? And then my second question is related to the trigger project. What was the magic number for IDLC?
So
What do you mean by the magic number?
Yeah.
Well, so the applicants, the school, applied to have a temporary use permit on the Evergreen Hall in order to operate as a school for the home learners under their purview, and the members of the neighborhood said, no, we don't want that school here. And one of their reasons for saying that was they felt that, at least one of the rationale was that the temporary use permit was being inappropriately used in this case, but it had to do with the duration, that it wasn't temporary enough or short enough. If that temporary use permit had been limited to 1 year, would that have worked for them?
No. I mean, that was one of the first sort of compromises I tried, was like, what if it's for one school year?
Right, to test the waters.
Yeah, and they basically said that the expense of moving in and like upgrading the septic field and whatever else, it wasn't going to work for them to do it for 1 year.
It wasn't working for the proponents. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's right, for the proponents. They
Right.
need.
What about for the neighbors? Were they just didn't want it, period?
Right, they were seeking any rationale they could find, and this was one.
Yeah.
But I guess the question being whether was that the opponents used the term as an issue. Was there a term that would have worked for them?
I don't think so.
No, then they didn't.
I don't think so either. Like, I think when I would meet with people, they'd be opposed to the temporary use and want it to be a rezoning instead.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, well, would you support a rezoning? And generally, when they would say no, they wouldn't support a rezoning of it. They just liked the rezoning process because they felt there was more opportunity for it to stop.
Yeah.
I see.
Can I ask a semi-related question? does language make a difference? Like, for example, is the temporary use permit on the land or on the concept? So if someone had a temporary use permit, they did their 3 years, they got their 3-year extension, they completed their 6 years, but they wanted another temporary use permit and applied for it using different language, would they receive it?
They could apply for another permit for the same temporary use.
And it is the use, it's not the land. Like you could get a temporary use permit for a food truck. And I think,
It's tied to land. It would have to be on a specific piece of land.
oh, so a food truck can't move around then using
No.
a temporary use permit.
No.
But
But
on
so
a-
like the classic, Louise, like a lot of, like when I was in Kitimat, there were gravel mines or, gravel deposits on Crown land that were done through temporary use permits that had temporary use permits for, 30 years.
Uh-huh.
And they just called it something different each time the time period had,
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's you apply again for another temporary use permit.
So they would simply reapply for the same use as a temporary
Yeah.
use permit.
Yeah.
And go through 2
And
cycles and then
yeah.
start again.
And so the issue is like, it's a temporary use in that the permission is temporary and that, council could come and say, no, you can't have it again.
Right.
Or same in Kitimat, we use temporary use permits for like home occupations. So you would apply for it. We wouldn't let you do any of the stuff that we do in Bowen in your property. But if you wanted to have an architect office, you'd need to apply for a temporary use permit and then you get it renewed. And then if neighbors complained and said they have too many people coming, then council wouldn't renew the permit.
So I think that just to make it simple, that why not just leave it at 3 years and not reinvent the wheel and allow council to make it shorter if they want.
is there a risk taking out short-term and seasonal out of the phrase?
I mean, so instead of, if it just said, may consideration temporary use permits that will not create an unacceptable negative impact, and then its permit shall be issued in accordance with the Local Government Act. I mean, it used to be that you could only do temporary use permits for a 2-year term. And at some point, the BC government changed the Local Government Act about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, to make it a 3-year term instead of a 2-year term. So in theory, I guess we could take it out and then the province could come back and say, well, it can be a 5-year term. And we'd say, yep, that still fits with our policy, but it would still be up to council to determine if that was appropriate.
Well, when you get into something like 5 years, you really are talking about probably making some substantial improvements. They want that some kind of guarantee, and that's a little scary.
Yeah, and I haven't seen anything that would happen, but that would be, I guess, the risk, is now we're saying it can happen.
But we could change it then.
Yeah.
Like, anyway, that's,
I'm kind of leaning the way I'm hearing Kirsty. I'm trying, because my other question is still, what is it council is council concerned about that they will not be able to determine what the term should be, or what? Yeah, what is this? David, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's real concern. It's just because in the issue that we had with the school, because people said, well, 3 years isn't short term. It's just, okay, is this too confusing for the public that to call this short term when it's 3 years? Is that inappropriate? But council itself, I don't know, Daniel, you could see what you thought, but I didn't really hear any worries from council in terms of the 3-year term or wanting to change that particularly. They just didn't want it to be too confusing. Would you say that, Daniel? Is that what you heard?
I mean, I would say like council has already issued temporary use permits for 3 years, like previous to this application.
Yeah.
I would say during the application, I did hear from councillors who felt that 3 years wasn't short term. but whether they would be, but they might just be satisfied then if we change it and we make it so it's clear that it's for a, you know, it's a 3-year term and it's not confusing. They might be happy with that because then, you know, people know going into an application what the rules are.
But isn't it up to 3 years? Doesn't
Yeah.
have to be. Yeah, so it's not 3 years, it's for up to 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The policy doesn't state 3 years, it states consistent with the LGA, correct?
Yeah.
So as the, if and when the LGA were to change, then that would automatically change as well. So the challenge really then, if you look at it from that perspective, is not with our OCP, it's a challenge is with the Local Government Act, because they're the ones saying that's short term.
Yeah, that's correct. That's
Well,
correct.
they're saying it's a temporary use.
so the word short term, I think, is the problem. It's temporary use is different than short term.
Yeah, like we've added a condition that isn't in the Local Government Act.
Oh, I see what you're saying, Daniel. Right. So I'm just reading it to everybody. The municipality may consider issuing temporary land use permits provided the use is short-term or seasonal in nature and will not create an unacceptable negative impact upon the natural environment or the character of the neighborhood. So all that last stuff, the provided it doesn't, and that short-term, that's stuff that we've added and it's not in the Local Government Act.
Right.
Make it confusing.
All right. So we've made it confusing by adding that stuff.
I mean, funnily enough, when I was looking at other communities and what they do, like Galliano has this section on temporary use permits. And so their first point, then they have this numbered list, and their first point says they may be issued for short-term uses. And their second point says it can be issued for any period up to 3 years.
Yeah.
So they've, you know, they've sort of gone the other way and just fully embraced that it's short-term, and short-term means.
Yeah.
So
Well, I guess for some,
the wording could be changed, however, the term short term could be taken out, and it could read something like temporary land use permits, provided the use is consistent with and in accordance with the Local Government Act,
Sure.
and just take the term short term out completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would take, like I would say the municipality may consider issuing temporary land use permits provided the use will not create an unacceptable negative impact, and just cut out the short term and seasonal. And then it would still say permit shall be issued in accordance with the Local Government Act.
Right.
perfect.
That to me makes sense.
Yeah.
And it puts the onus on council to determine how long a particular application should run, how long the temporary use permit should run.
Yeah.
But I don't see that as particularly troublesome. Do you, David?
No, not at all. Dead simple. It just gets rid of the people saying, well, that's not short term. That's all.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think it's consistent then with, because, you know, where we had the clause that it's with the character of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
In essence, that again too is like council's determination.
Yeah.
You know, and so council may say, well, this would be appropriate, but only on a much shorter term. Otherwise, it'll impact the character of the neighborhood.
Yeah, because I think that was called into question too, about the negative impact on the neighborhood. Well, what does that mean exactly? That's quite subjective.
It's
Yeah,
completely.
and
There were
And
people relating in the relationship to the IDLC application. There were some people who felt that it would be an enhancement to the neighborhood, and
Exactly.
some people who felt it would be a detriment.
That's right.
So, you know,
Yeah. And on council, there was the same feeling.
so I don't know. You'd like to keep that part of it in though, would you, Daniel?
I would, and I think, at least like in my mind, it's clear enough that's council's determination.
Yeah.
So it's like people can share their views on it to council, and ultimately it's what, you know, council to determine in their minds that it meets the character of the neighborhood or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's not no clear definition, that's for sure. But the issue is, I mean, I guess a similar would be something like the quality of life in the neighborhood. I mean, basically, you don't want to wreck things. But of course, you know, what's wrecking for some people might be an enhancement for someone else.
Right.
But that's a political decision, and that's what, you know, that's what we have to do.
Right. That's what you got elected for.
Yeah.
So do you have that wording then, Daniel, in a form that you're happy with?
So on my hearing, we're just taking out short-term and seasonal.
Yeah.
Is that where we landed? So
Yeah.
the recommendation is, as far as it was written on the agenda package, the APC support, blah, 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 with the following amendments to OCP policy 235,
What page is that on?
short-term and
That's
seasonal.
Page 1 of 2 or 6 of 27.
Okay, 6 of 27.
And I can say, and leave in the reference to being in compliance with the Local Government Act.
Yeah.
I would say just
I
put in
like that.
what's going to change.
So just remove the term short-term and seasonal.
Yeah.
Well, you're taking out, so it's going to read, the municipality may consider issuing temporary land use permits provided the use will not create an unacceptable negative impact. So you're taking out the word
Yeah,
is, short-term and seasonal in nature, and.
That's right.
How's everyone feel about that? Louise, do you have any?
No, I think that's good to take out that part of the,
It takes away the is 3 years short-term.
Yeah.
Dennis, or how about you? How are you feeling about that?
I agree.
Okay. So, all right, do we have any more
So
discussion?
was there then about the character of the neighborhood? I got a bullet point for that in the recommendation. Did you want to mention
Keeping it in, Steph, so it's just staying as it is, just taking those words out
on it?
and the rest stays the same.
Okay.
All right. Do I have a motion to amend, to recommend to council that they amend policy 235 as we described?
Sure.
Dennis, second. Louise, all in favor? We are unanimous. All right, carried. Quick, go to my agenda. Is there anything else?
No.
Yay.
Wait,
So we have,
There's a COVID information package here.
Oh, that's just for information.
Right.
That's linked to our webpage.
Okay.
so we have next meeting TBD. So what council's done is like only held the meetings when we have referrals. So
Right.
we said the next meeting that we have scheduled is that September 16th meeting. But if we have no referrals, we won't be holding it.
All right.
Yeah, so staff will cancel us.
Is your work on the land use bylaw continuing? Is that something you?
Yeah, and actually my goal is to send that to the last July meeting, and then I would have it for the APC in September.
Aha.
Yeah.
So
So,
I'll say September 16th then.
Provided I can finish it by Friday to get it on the agenda, then we'll get it in September.
Better let you go. You got to get to work.
Yeah, right.
so that in fact would also then be a referral. I take it.
Yeah, that would be a referral.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight, and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Yes, you too.
Yes,
Yeah.
you too. Now that it's actually summer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If David Lynch were here, I'd ask him to move to adjourn. But
Oh, I'll be David Wren.
all right, Kirsty, thank you. All right, everybody. Yeah, see you in September.
All right.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye all.
bye.